Japan's most famous battleship survived the entire Pacific War. It survived 5 American aircraft carriers attacking it at once. It survived 2 nuclear bombs, and then it quietly capsized alone in the dark, with no crew and no ceremony. And nobody has touched it since. The Nagato is still there, upside down, 170 feet down at the bottom of a remote Pacific lagoon. And the reasons why nobody has ever come back for it are stranger than the story of how it got there. When the Nagato was completed in 1920, it was the most powerful battleship in the world. The first ever built with 16-inch guns. Those barrels were 60 feet long and could fire a shell over 23 miles, 738 feet long, 47,000 tons fully loaded. Japan was so proud of it, they classified its top speed as a state secret. It was more than a warship. It was the symbol of Japanese naval power, and the entire country knew it. On December 11, 1941, Admiral Yamamoto commanded the attack on Pearl Harbor from the Nagato's bridge. The order that brought the United States into the war came from this ship. By August 1945, every other Japanese battleship had been sunk. The Yamato, the Musashi, all of them gone. The Nagato had survived the entire Pacific War. It fought at Leyte Gulf. It was attacked by aircraft from 5 American carriers in July 1945 and still didn't sink. When Japan surrendered, American sailors specifically boarded the Nagato before the formal surrender ceremony was even signed. The U.S. Navy said the act symbolized the complete defeat of the Japanese Navy. Then they pointed it at Bikini Atoll, Operation Crossroads, July 1946. The U.S. military had 95 target ships anchored in the lagoon. The plan was to demonstrate what nuclear weapons could do to a fleet. The Nagato, Japan's most symbolic warship, was positioned 1,500 meters from ground zero for the first test. The bomb went off. The Nagato barely moved. Wrinkled plating, some doors blown off, paint scorched. A skeleton crew boarded it afterward and ran one of its boilers for 36 hours without problems. The U.S. military was not happy. The whole point was to show nuclear weapons destroying warships. Japan's most hated ship was sitting there barely scratched, so they moved it closer for the second test. For the Baker test on July 25th, the Nagato was positioned 870 meters from ground zero. They had also strapped mines to its sides specifically to help sink it. The bomb detonated underwater. A column of water over a mile high erupted from the lagoon and drenched the entire fleet in radioactive spray. When the water settled, the Nagato was still floating. List of just 2 degrees. This is the bit that got me. The most hated ship in the American fleet had survived 2 nuclear bombs with mines attached to its hull and was still afloat. But something was different this time. The Baker test had coated every surface of every ship in radioactive water. The Nagato was so contaminated that nobody could approach within 1,000 yards of her. Sailors tried hosing her down from a distance. Nothing worked. Unable to board, unable to stop the flooding, the Americans could only watch as the list slowly increased. 3 days after the test, it had reached 8 degrees. Then it kept going. On the night of July 29, 1946, with no crew, no ceremony, and no one watching, the most famous warship in Japanese history quietly rolled over and disappeared beneath the surface. By morning, the spot where the Nagato had been was empty. So why has nobody ever come back for it? The first reason is the radioactivity. Right after the Baker test, the Nagato was dangerously contaminated. Nobody had been aboard since before the test. Nobody knew the exact state of the ship because nobody could get close enough to check. In 1946, with the nuclear age barely a year old, nobody was rushing to volunteer for that job. The second reason is the location. Bikini Atoll sits in the Marshall Islands, 2,500 miles from Hawaii. No port nearby, no shipbreaking yard, no heavy equipment. Every piece of a salvage operation would have to cross thousands of miles of open Pacific. That alone makes the cost enormous before you've touched a single piece of steel. The third reason is the steel itself. The Nagato was built in 1920, which means its steel is what scientists call low background steel. All steel produced after the first nuclear test in 1945 contains trace amounts of radioactive particles from atmospheric fallout. Pre-war steel doesn't. That makes it genuinely valuable for sensitive scientific instruments, radiation detectors, hospital shielding rooms. There is a real market for it. Here is the problem. The Baker test detonated a nuclear bomb underwater. Then a column of radioactive water collapsed back down onto the entire fleet and soaked into every surface of the ship. The test that sank the Nagato also contaminated the steel that might otherwise have made it worth salvaging. Nobody ever bothered to run the salvage numbers because they were obviously never going to work. Today, the situation is permanent. In 2010, UNESCO declared Bikini Atoll a World Heritage Site. The Marshall Islands opened the lagoon to divers in 1996, and the Nagato became one of the most famous wreck dives in the world. You can descend past 4 propellers each 13 feet across. You can swim the full length of the upturned hull. You can enter the bridge where Yamamoto gave the order that started the Pacific War. The Marshall Islands owns the wreck. It is their most valuable dive attraction, a UNESCO site, and a war grave. Nobody is coming back for it. The most powerful battleship in the world when it was built, the ship that launched Pearl Harbor, the only Japanese battleship to survive the entire war. It ended up capsizing alone in the dark, and it has been sitting upside down at the bottom of a Pacific lagoon ever since.